Hey, I'm Corduroy Brown, and this is my near death experience. COVID was a really weird time for a lot of people. I remember when I first found out about COVID, I was actually working at a TV station and I'm a touring musician as well. And you kind of don't think that, anything's going to happen sometimes. You see stuff on the news and you wonder, even as someone who worked in the news, you're like, is it getting over sensationalized? And it was kind of weird to see it all. COVID was such a weird time in life in general. And I don't know. I mean, maybe there's never been anything like that before, but it's weird that we got to live through such a weird historical event, I guess. And I remember just being on the road and being out and about, and everyone kind of started to cancel the shows. And you're like, okay, come on, it's going to be over with for in a little while. It's not really that big of a deal. But COVID, as we know, continued to get worse and worse and worse. And, you kind of watched it start getting pretty close. And being here in West Virginia, I feel like West Virginia is kind of like not stuck in the past a little bit, but it seems like we're kind of the last to kind of get caught up to things. So it seemed like it kind of hit West Virginia last, and it could just be because there's so many mountains and hills and everyone's kind of spread apart anyway. But I remember hearing about COVID and everyone on the news is freaking out about it. And I'm thinking, well, man, how bad could this really be? Is it going to affect anything? And then again, as you know, everything started getting closed down and you got to see everything just kind of stop in place for a while. And I know a lot of people that got COVID that were just kind of sick, but not really that sick. And then you hear on the news, man, like there's some people getting really sick from this. And there was so much confusion and uncertainty. And I guess if you fast forward a little bit into 2021, still COVID's pretty prominent at this point. I finally ended up getting it. And I figured because, I was still meeting with people and still hanging out with friends and you just don't really know. I don't think anyone really knew. I mean, at the time, everyone was like, wear a mask, stay away. But, you never think it's going to happen to you, I guess. So I ended up getting COVID. And when I had COVID originally, when I first actually was infected, with COVID, it was like a cold. And I remember being in my apartment at the time and felt like a sinus problem, no big deal. And, I had to stay away from work and stuff, obviously, but kind of just like, okay, wow, maybe this isn't such a big deal. But a couple weeks go by, I go back to work and I noticed some weird stuff and I was just feeling really odd. And again, it just the surrealness of it all kind of being shut down. Everything was just shutting down and just around the world. But I remember going back to work and I was kind of nauseous still. So I just feel like it was just maybe like, I guess, I don't know, if you get any kind of sickness, you just don't feel right away. So after a couple weeks went by, go back to work, and I start noticing I'm starting to throw up a little bit, and I was like, okay, maybe I just ate some weird stuff or whatever. But I'm also really tired, and I don't know whatever it could be. Who knows? And not really thinking much of it. And I noticed that my lymph node in my neck, on my left side of my neck, started becoming pretty big. And I was like, okay, that's not good, but whatever. Maybe I'll just get some antibiotics. Maybe I just got a sinus infection. Who knows, man? Pretty nonchalant at the time. Another day goes by. I notice my lymph node is relatively larger than a golf ball. And I'm thinking, okay, I probably should go to the doctor. And so I do. And, reluctantly take yourself to the urgent care because you don't want to pay for the doctor visit, as some people do. And I was thinking, man, they're just going to get me in and out of here. No problem. They'll give me antibiotics and whatever. So everything was so high strung at that point that anytime you go to the doctor, everyone was like kind of really concerned about anything at this point because no one really knew what was going on truly. But ended up going to the urgent care and they're like, hey, can we just do some blood work on you? I just want to see because, that's a rather large lymph node and whatnot. So they do blood work and they said, hey, we really actually think you should go to the ER. And I was like, for just my lymph node being swollen? They're like, well, your white blood cell counts like through the roof, your heart rate's elevated, you said you've been throwing up. We're not sure, but you should probably go. And I literally said, no, I don't want to go to the ER. I mean, I don't want to pay for that, first of all, which is kind of another whole story of, man, why is being sick so expensive? And they make me sign a thing. They make me sign a disclosure saying, hey, I refused medical care by going to the ER so that they could cover their rear end. So another day goes by. This is like a Saturday. And I mean, I haven't eaten, since Thursday. So a few days I've been puking a lot and my lymph node's still huge. And I'm just puking and just not feeling great. And I go to the ER and they say, well, Mr. Brown, you need to just calm down a little bit. You're really anxious. And I said, I don't think that's it. People describe me as a basset hound. I'm not super animated. I'm kind of real go with the flow and I don't really get anxious. I told them that and they wouldn't believe me for some reason, but they said, no, here's some Ativan and here's some stuff to calm you down. And keep in mind, like when I went to the ER, I'd been throwing up a lot and my kidneys had started hurting. My lymph node was still swollen and my breathing was a little efforted. And you just don't really think past that. You're just like, okay, I'm just going to go there to be in and out real quick. And little did I know, like 10 hours later, I was going to be back in the ER. I hadn't slept that whole next night. As soon as the Ativan and the rest of the medicine they gave me wore off, my kidneys started to become extremely painful. And that was, I mean, miserable pain. and hard to explain that. It felt like people were squeezing around my legs and just had vice grips on my legs, and I was throwing up a lot, still having trouble breathing. And I ended up calling my mom, and I was like, "Hey, I think something's wrong. I don't really know, but they didn't say anything was right in the wrong in the ER. So I kind of want to go back though." And as I'm getting up, and I'm so dehydrated, I haven't slept and haven't eaten since Thursday at this point, so I can't keep anything down, and I'm pretty weak. I remember like walking down the stairs of my apartment, like really just like kind of foggy and just like kind of limping down there because I just had nothing in my body. And I get to the hospital and I say, "Hey, I came in yesterday, but I got to come back." And they're like, "Well, what's going on?" And I said, "Oh, my lungs, I'm having a real hard time breathing. I'm still throwing up. My kidneys are on fire right now. I don't know." And at this point, I'd gotten so sick so many times to my stomach that, I mean, I was just sitting there and I had to keep running back to the bathroom and just whatever I could get out of my body, it was trying to get rid of. And eventually they get me down to like kind of a pre-room before they get me up to the main room. And, my kidneys are just absolutely on fire, and they're kind of not sure. Cause I guess like in West Virginia, there is a problem with opioids, and there's a huge documentaries about it, and it's getting better. But I think nurses and the hospital staff are so used to people coming in asking for medicine and drugs, basically to painkillers, that they're very hesitant to just give that stuff out. But I've never been addicted to drugs or never been interested in that at all. But the amount of pain that was in my kidneys was just immense. And I couldn't get them to believe me because they thought he's just in here from pain medicine. He came back yesterday and he was here the day before and whatever. But at this point, they're not really sure. I'm not in an official room yet, but my mom ended up coming there. I have a credible relationship with my parents, so you'll hear me referencing them a lot. But she was there, and she was trying to figure out what was going on too. And she asked them like, "Hey, what's going on?" And no one knew at the time. So she, I guess, had overheard one of the nurses out in the hallway, because I had been laying in a hospital bed by myself, like trying to yell for help because I was in that much pain. And so many nurses had came by, and I was getting kind of scared at this point because of the amount of pain. And mom had said she'd heard one of the nurses say, "Hey, like, can someone please go help that guy? He's not in here for drugs. Like, I went to school with him. Please help him." So then people actually came to the room. A little bit more time goes by. They get me to a room, and we're probably sitting on Sunday and into Monday. Still haven't really slept. I haven't been able to eat anything. And my breathing at this point is approaching zero, and my kidneys are still there. And there's so many doctors in and out of this room trying to figure out what's going on, because what I didn't know is I was going through multiple organ failure, and my heart, my lungs, and my kidneys were all failing. And keep in mind, COVID happened 3 weeks ago at this point. I'm back to work. Everything's fine. But multiple organs were failing, and they didn't really understand why yet. I remember texting my friend who I used to work at the TV station with. I used to be one of the directors for the morning show. And I texted him and I was like, "Hey man, I'm watching your show. What's going on?" And he's like, "Why are you up so early?" I was like, "Well, I'm in the hospital. Hopefully I'm out of here." And they bring in like a little CPAP mask for me. And I guess I dozed off a couple times finally. And the nurse, when I woke back up, was like, "Oh, okay, hey, I'm glad to see you finally got some rest." And I noticed how incoherent I was becoming. It was hard to just kind of gather thoughts. And I felt like I was in this loop of just like, you ever wake up from a dream, like a falling dream, and that initial shock of just that panic, and like my lungs just couldn't get air. It felt like I was breathing like through a straw, but there was no air happening at all. I could not quite catch full breath. So they're bringing in CPAP masks, and they try to, get some air in my lungs and stuff. And I noticed the tempo steps up a little bit, and the doctors and stuff, and a little bit more time goes by, and they say, "Hey, Mr. Brown, we actually need you to call like your family or loved ones or anyone like that. We have to put you on a ventilator, and you need to make those calls now. And we're also going to send in a chaplain before that." And that's a jarring statement to hear because, at the time I was 31 and never really had any health issues, but they're talking about sending in someone to get my soul right with God or whoever. And that's when the bomb kind of dropped. And I remember making that call to my parents and my friend and was like, "Hey, I guess I'm supposed to call you guys. I'm getting put on a vent." And I don't know what's happening at that point, but that's when it really, really amped up. And I'm sure people who are watching this have seen those doctor shows where like all the doctors are rushing in and hooking up stuff, and all these things are happening super fast, and everything's 1,000 miles per hour. Apparently I'm actively dying. That's scary to hear as well. And I remember when they're rushing me down to put me on a vent, there were 3 nurses on both sides of me. And the nurse closest to me on my left side, she didn't have any urgency about her. She had just kept looking at me like, "Oh man, he's not going to make this." Like, she was the only one that gave up on me. And I wish I knew who that was, because I want to just say, "Man, please, I made this." Like, you had already given up on me. And I wish I could just see that nurse, and not to say anything mean, but she had given up on me already. And, I got a chance to talk to a couple of those nurses later in life. And a couple years later, even, they came to the ceremony for music and everything I was a part of. And I asked her why I kept blacking out and why I couldn't grasp anything. I just no longer was in my body, it didn't feel like. And she said, "Yes, you were actively in the stage of dying. That's why everything went to black and then it would come back, but you had no control over it. You were actively dying, and we were trying to figure that out. And here's where it gets even crazier, I guess. And, I feel like maybe there are people that could possibly have way cooler stories than mine, but the sensations are so hard to capture, I feel like. But they made the decision to fly me to Ruby Memorial Hospital in Morgantown, West Virginia. And, I'm obviously on a vent at this point, and they had stopped taking kind of cardiovascular patients that were COVID related up at Ruby, but they had one room available somehow. And on top of that, the pilots had told my parents, like, if we're going to fly, like, you have to make a decision like immediately, because the weather is that bad up there. We need to go now, or we got to drive them somewhere. So they made the immediate call to say, hey, let's go to Morgantown right now. And the only reason I'm still alive is because they sent me somewhere else, because no one at the time knew what was going on. And I guess, Morgantown at Ruby, they kind of had sort of an experience with it, but not really. COVID was such a crazy time, but that's when I died. That's when I was no longer a part of the earth. It's such an odd thing to say that so nonchalantly now. And I've told this story quite a bit, but that's when I was gone. And a lot of this near-death experiences I've heard kind of talk about this like irradiating white light. And that's the first thing that I remember, is that as far as I could see, there were infinitely white space. There was just infinite white space around me. I couldn't touch the ground. I wasn't on anything solid, and I couldn't really do much other than acknowledge it. It's like my consciousness was sort of there, but like all I could do was just acknowledge. I couldn't interact. And when I say infinite, I truly mean there was infinite white space everywhere, and I wasn't touching the ground. And this is where it gets tricky to explain it, because even though there was nothing around me, the amount of peace, there's not another word other than just comfort and perfection, and it's so hard to even explain it, but the amount of bliss that was in that completely infinite white space of nothing was unlike anything I've ever felt on the earth. I don't really want to go back yet, but it kind of makes me wonder, like, if you're religious, I mean, I don't know what I believe sometimes, but I believe in a creator. But was I like in purgatory, or was I like on the outer edge of heaven? Or I don't feel like I was going the wrong way. It wasn't hot and scary down there, but it was wild just to be there, and I could acknowledge it, but I couldn't interact with it. But it felt amazing. It felt so, just again, blissful is the best word. And I've never experienced anything like that on the earth. That feeling of just pure peace, and everything was amazing and perfect. And against the hard white contrast of just that infinite white was this kind of black ball of energy, like the size of a basketball, maybe. I don't know how else to explain that other than a ball of energy, I guess. But it started really, I could see it for a while, then it kind of felt like it just got really close to me. Like I couldn't touch it though, and I didn't want to touch it, but I could say, hey, that's there. Okay, what now? And I remember being there for a while. And as I was there in that infinite white space, not touching anything solid, literally levitating in that infinite white space, that black ball of energy that I became kind of friends with and said, okay, well, we're both here. What is this? Started to slowly go way out into the distance, which felt like it took forever almost, but it never was scary. It never felt wrong. It never felt bad that I was alone again, but that little black orb decided to go way off in the distance. There's just not a feeling on earth that can place that bliss that was there. Then it comes crashing down, because the jarring feeling of getting zapped out of that place felt like whiplash almost, because I'm hearing the doctor say, hey, Mr. Brown, can you hear us? You're in Morgantown, West Virginia, Mountaineers, WVU. And the uncomfortable ripcord sensation from that piece to now being back and feeling gravity and feeling everything and all these things just interacting with me, and humans and voices and lights and sounds. It was awful to come back to, but I was in Morgantown, West Virginia, where they had life flighted me, and they had put me on this machine called ECMO. And from what I understand, you're not really supposed to survive ECMO. It's generally the last ditch effort of what they give people, but you're realistically, I mean, they generally use ECMO to keep your body around long enough so that your loved ones could say goodbye. But it's Thursday at this point. So I fast forwarded from Tuesday to Thursday with no recollection other than that white infinite space. So I don't know how long I was actually dead or whatever that was. 2 days had went by in that perfect bliss, and then I'm jarred back to the earth. And there's videos of me interacting with the nurses where they were trying to like barely wean me off the life support machine, because what they do with the ECMO machine, they take the blood out of your body through your femoral arteries, and basically I had these 2 giant red tubes in my hips. And I see that, and I'm hooked up to every machine possible. I can't move my neck really because there's another port there. There's 3 or 4 IVs, and alarms going off like crazy, and just beeping, and people constantly talking. And it just, man, again, that ripcord onboard sensation of like, oh my gosh, it's like it was like a car wreck that just pulled me back to the earth. And I get to learn a little bit about what's going on after I'm slowly getting weaned off sedation, and they're letting my body get its autonomy back, and eventually talking to these nurses asking what is going on, because there's what? Like, I remember being in the hospital, but I'm awake and now I'm hooked up to even more machines, and they're explaining, okay, you're currently being weaned off life support, which I thought was wild to get to talk to somebody while I was still technically on life support. And there were days there that just, even time, I guess, they were trying to kind of touch the water and see what my body could get away with. And there were these times where they would like see how far they could push my body, and it would react horribly because it just wasn't ready yet. And all the alarms would go back and all this stuff would happen. Nurses flying in the room. And it was just the most wild thing to wake up to. And all that's kind of blurry. Then they decide that they're actually going to take me off the life support, which is a great thing, because they originally had given me 2 weeks to be on that type of life support. And then they said, well, we got to make a decision after 2 weeks. And my body started trending in the right direction. So I was only on life support for, I guess, 3 or 4 or 5 days. I don't remember the exact, obviously, piece of it all. So, another surgery to get the tubes removed. And then you kind of come to terms with, I wasn't on the earth. Then you just get flooded with, okay, what now? And what I can say that this whole experience was just, I feel weird because I know people that didn't survive COVID and other diseases and stuff like that. But this was called, I guess, MIS-A, which is some kind of multiple inflammatory syndrome of my organs. And basically what happened was that COVID, even though I had COVID and had recovered perfectly fine, the antibodies in my body said, whoa, what is all that? And then there was this just crazy immune response from my immune system, and that put my heart into a state of shock, which freaked out my organs. So instead of just heart failure, I became heart failure, liver failure, kidney failure, and lung failure all at the same time. And my body had just checked out. It was given up, and they had to wean me off that life support to see what it was going to do next. And, when I finally got out of there, you really start to think like, what if this happens again? Or am I actually going to get out of here? Or is this the worst of it? And there were some horrible nights there. There were some awful nights. The immense pain in my kidneys and lungs came back. And man, the staff at Rubin Memorial is no joke, man. They hold their heads high. They went right into action and did this ECMO life support. And if you've ever wondered what regret feels like, you have to die to get the full scale of it, because I feel like regret is such a short word, but it weighs 40 tons. It weighs an immeasurable amount, even though it's just a short word. Regret was the heaviest and worst feeling that I ever felt laying in those hospital beds, because suddenly I had regretted all the time I had wasted. And I don't mean you have to go and, jump off. You don't have to go skydiving. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do these crazy things. But I regretted so much time that I wasted being upset at trivial things and people who had hurt me. And regret was the thing that I never want to feel to that extent again. If I could ever encourage people, and I do that with my music and when I do public speaking about mental health and any of that stuff, I mean, I don't ever want to get to that point again and say, man, I wish I had never done that, because there's no way to measure how heavy the regret of time wasted felt. And that doesn't mean you don't have to just go and be doing 100,000 things every day and every second of the day. But I mean, why am I upset about the smallest things, and why am I not letting things go? And, the stuff that like hippie people say, like, man, all you got to do is love, like they're onto something. They're truly onto something. It's worth it to just, God, why are we not running towards our things that make us happy, and the people that make us happy at 4 million miles per hour? Like, it doesn't make any sense, because, I struggled with mental health for as long as I can remember, being in middle school and in high school and college. And I self-harmed a lot, especially in high school and college. And my primary form of self-harm was cutting. And I had experimented with a couple things. I just lived life sometimes really recklessly, not thinking I was going to make it past another year anyway. That I just, before that whole experience, it's like I was testing God, and I would almost like test him and say, like, I don't even want to be alive. And then he brings me there, whoever brings me there, universe brings me there and says, I'm going to show you that you don't really want to die. I'm going to take you to death and bring you back and take you about as close as you can to getting what you asked for. Now, what do you want out of it? Now, what do you want out of life? And I don't know that maybe there's some grand purpose in life other than just to live and exist, but I found my purpose again. And people ask me all the time, like, what did that teach you? And it's like, it didn't teach me something as much as it reminded me that, like, man, we get this one time on the earth, and like I'm sitting here wasting it, not living to the full potential, and even trying to take my own life at times. And that's kind of my message of encouragement to people, that like somehow got to see it get better. And I wish anyone that's ever struggling with staying alive is that like you can see it get better, but you have to hold on to it. You have to try. You have to go after it. And when I was dying and when I did come back, like I didn't want things. I didn't want material possessions. I mean, I didn't want a car, or I didn't want a house or whatever. I didn't want that stuff. All I wanted was time. And there are people who are going to be way smarter and more talented than I'll ever be in my entire life. And they're not any better than me just because of those things. There's people like Steve Jobs, who was the owner of Apple, and he died of cancer, right? And all he wanted was more time. And if I could just like go back and talk to my younger self, I would say, man, like get out of your own way. There's so much life to live. And, if you're watching this, you have access to internet, and most likely you have clothes on your back, and man, there's no reason to not run towards whatever drives you to be happy at, again, full top speed. And what was so bizarre to see was just the outpouring of love in the community. Huntington, West Virginia is not a big town. Everyone knows each other, just like you'd imagine. I grew up in a little town called Chesapeake across the river, where we literally had one stoplight. There was like less than 100 kids in our graduating class. But it felt like the entire earth had my back and was praying. And I don't know why I got favor over some people who didn't make it, but I struggle with that, because why didn't those people get the amount of support? Why didn't those people make it? Why didn't those people have that many people praying for them? And on top of that, what was even more bizarre is like my best friend Josh had set up a GoFundMe that when I woke up and could make sense of stuff, it had like $30,000 in it, where people were just donating. People had made t-shirts, and there was like benefit concerts, and there was all kinds of stuff that was just going on, that people just had my back. And we released the first album as Corduroy Brown, as me. My first album was called Let Me Know, because my entire life people had shown up for me in that way. And when you say the phrase let me know, it really means like, man, I'm yielding everything I am to make sure you're okay. And I've had that my entire life, and I don't know why. I don't think I deserve it. I don't know. It's just the bizarre. There's so many emotions that just come from dying and coming back. And I just wish people would know that like we get this one time, or twice technically in my case, but you get at least one time to do what you love and get out of your own way. Quit being afraid, because regret is going to haunt you when you're dying. I experienced that in full force, the regret of not doing everything I could. And I don't know, I've just found so much peace in knowing that when I do die again, I can go to another peaceful place. I take this opportunity to just say, man, it's all going to happen. No one's going to live forever, but I hope that now is what you focus on. And we're blessed with time if you're young enough and healthy, and we're blessed with all of this, so we have to use it. I'm not ready to quite go back to that place, but I think I have a lot more peace knowing that where I did go was pretty amazing. And even if it's hard to explain those words, it was this beautiful and perfect place.